Douglas Murray, the propaganda puppet. So, is Douglas Murray an arsehole? Well, no, he actually isn't an arsehole, because that would be an insult to arseholes. At least they serve a biological function. Douglas Murray, on the other hand, serves none, unless you count being a mouthpiece for military propaganda and an apologist for state violence. He's not just a bad journalist. He's not just a poor writer. He's a pompous, self-righteous pseudo-intellectual who thinks that his Oxbridge accent can mask his complete lack of evidence and objectivity. Douglas Murray calls himself an expert on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Why? Because he's written a couple of books. And his first book, a biography of Lord Alfred Douglas, Oscar Wilde's lover. Well, that's not exactly a launchpad for geopolitical insight, is it? Yet here he is, on global platforms, from Joe Rogan to Fox News, sneering at anyone who disagrees with him. On Rogan, he belittled comedian Dave Smith for having an opinion on Gaza, claiming that he wasn't qualified, he wasn't an expert, because he hadn't been there.
Have you been to the crossing points?
No.
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been?
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it?
But then Murray goes to Gaza. He's on an IDF-guided tour, speaking only to soldiers pre-approved by the Israeli military. Now, that's not journalism. That's war tourism. Propaganda with a press badge. Look at some of his greatest hits. Israel uses precision-guided missiles to limit civilian casualties. I'll tell that to the thousands of dead children in Gaza. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and UN agencies have all documented systemic targeting of civilian infrastructure. He echoes the Israeli military line word for word. He defends their actions no matter how murderous they are. He claims that criticism of Israel is inherently anti-Semitic. Douglas Murray isn't an independent thinker. He's a propagandist, a willing tool in the service of war. Time and time again, Murray has been called out. Mehdi Hassan dismantled his fear-mongering on immigration and Islam. Nathan J. Robinson from the Current Affairs podcast took apart his book, showing how Murray cherry-picks data, ignores contradictory evidence, and runs entirely on emotional panic.
Douglas Murray, this man who presents himself as an expert on the Israel-Palestine conflict, what does he actually know? And is it in fact true? So I picked up his book, which is on democracies and death cult, and it was obvious to me immediately that Douglas Murray says a lot of things that just aren't true, and he doesn't really care about presenting this conflict in a fair way. Now, there are a number of cases in the book where he says things that are actually wrong, and they've been debunked. So, for example, Murray says that when Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar was killed, proof was discovered that one of Sinwar's bodyguards worked as a teacher and was employed by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Now, that's false. The allegation stems from the fact that a UN teacher's passport was found near Sinwar after his death. But as the Australian Associated Press explained, the passport did not belong to Sinwar's bodyguard, but to another man who is still alive. And then the man himself made a Facebook post saying he's alive and living in Egypt and he's not a Hamas bodyguard in Gaza. Murray is pushing a falsehood here. He's pushing something that has been debunked. He hasn't acknowledged that it's been debunked. He's just put it in his book as if it's a fact. Well, I looked it up and it's not true. So he's saying things that just aren't true. And he cares more about pushing the pro-Israel narrative than he does about whether anything he says is true.
Do you talk about these things?
Which things?
All these things that we're talking about.
Some of them, yeah.
Are you an expert?
I am on some, yes.
Now, Murray has said that he loathes Mahmoud Khalil. Importantly for our purposes, he's also made factual misstatements. So in a March 2025 video, Douglas Murray said,
"You might wonder what the 30-year-old's doing at Columbia University, and I've been wondering that a bit. It turns out, by the way, this guy who was organizing these protests and leading them lived in Columbia University student accommodation, but was not actually a student. That's an odd thing in itself."
But that's not true. Mahmoud Khalil was a student. He was due to graduate in May of this year. He'd finished his coursework in December, so he wasn't doing any more coursework. but he was still in student housing because the university lets students stay in their housing through graduation. There's nothing strange about that. Douglas Murray is wrong that Khalil wasn't a student. What matters is the stuff he's saying true? And when we look, we see that Douglas Murray is a deceiver. He's not, in fact, what he presents himself as. He's not an expert on Israel-Palestine, or if he is, he's someone who uses the knowledge that he has of Israel-Palestine to manipulate people dishonestly into misunderstanding the conflict.
Murray doesn't do evidence, he does performance, and that performance is dangerous. Murray profits off war, he profits off creating an intellectual smokescreen for violence. He writes books you could wipe your arse with if they weren't already full of shit. So the next time Douglas Murray is wheeled in as a so-called expert, ask yourself, whose interest does he really serve?